And then let's get into this first story, which I think is, it's small, but I think we got some good news here. The Wall Street Journal reports U.S. cancels ICBM test, a test launch amid Ukraine tensions. The move follows Putin's threat to increase readiness of Russia's nuclear forces. They say the Biden administration has canceled a routine test launch of an Air Force Minuteman III missile to avoid escalating nuclear tensions with Russia, U.S. officials said Wednesday. The Air Force had planned to conduct the test launch from Vandenberg Air Force Base in the early hours of Thursday, March 3rd. On Wednesday, however, the administration decided to postpone the test launch amid tensions with Kremlin over Ukraine. So the news that was coming out is that the foreign minister in Russia said World War III will be nuclear. It will be devastating. Basically, some have called it a thinly veiled threat to NATO. You screw with us, we drop bombs. Others have said it's kind of just a truth that it will come to nuclear war, and that he's not trying to say, we'll blow you up. But I see this as maybe not the most important or impactful thing in the world, but I think it shows the U.S. is not willing to push to bring us to that conflict, if even for just something as small as a routine test.
Rightly so.
But what do you think? Do you think there's a real prospect for escalation outside of Ukraine or nuclear war?
There is a danger of escalation if you look to what some of the politicians are pushing there. You look at some of the voices and how they've been talking about this war, and it's worrying. I don't think it's going to happen, but I do worry about some of these voices. It's interesting if you notice a pattern, right? The same voices that wanted to impose COVID mandates on everybody else to protect themselves are the same voices that would want to send our sons and relatives to war to protect themselves.
Mm. Yep. Well, I'll tell you, I got some applications for the Army for everybody who's in favor of U.S. intervention. By all means, sign on up and head on over.
And they won't.
Of course.
They'd rather we go. They don't want to go. They'd rather we go and serve their aims and their purposes.
Worse still, I think they'd rather your children go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Horrifying.
Yeah.
And that's how it's always been, though.
Yeah.
You're
still fighting age, though, Tim.
Me? I'm 35. I'm going to be 36 in 7 days.
You're still fighting age.
I suppose.
Don't say he's going to start walking around with a cane. Okay.
And I will brag. My resting heart rate 48.
Yeah,
don't say you're all right. Well, you just got drafted, buddy. Good job. My goodness.
I've been I got this health app, and I've been blood pressure has improved dramatically.
You're
I fixed
it
my
worse.
diet. I've been exercising.
Well, look,
you're a super soldier, is what you're saying.
Tim's
like, I don't want to fight in the war, but I would be the best soldier. I'd win it by myself.
It's like I feel like it's a great accomplishment for myself to be getting healthy. I feel like everybody should do that. So
Absolutely.
I'm just gonna brag about it.
If the military's watching, I'm just in horrible shape. There's no
Seamus's feet are so flat.
The flattest feet ever. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I can say it's good news. I'm happy they're doing this because it's good to de-escalate. But some of the rhetoric, I mean, we had the Mayor of London talk about, look, if there is a nuclear attack on London, we're ready. That kind of rhetoric is just unnecessary, I think, considering what's going on. And what's going on is worrying. I mean, look, Putin invaded a country, right? Nobody can countenance or condone in the invasion of any country. I just find it strange that some of the voices that till this day don't accept it was wrong to invade Iraq or Afghanistan are now condemning Putin's invasion of a foreign country.
I seem to think of it as we're invading Iraq right now. It's a constant invasion.
Well, we're still there.
Yeah, it is. It's
occupation.
We are occupying and invading that country on a daily basis by being there. It's not like it happened and it happened in the past. It's happening right now.
The thing is, what I find amazing with this, and I think it's really interesting that I believe we're in. George Orwell in 1984 split the world up into 4 different blocks, right? Oceania, which was landing strip 1, which is the UK, and then America and its sphere of influence, which includes what we call the Five Eyes, so Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the Anglo-Saxon sphere. The other block that Orwell used in 1984 was East Asia, and that just considered China in that area. And then he had Eurasia, right? Eurasia was Russia and Europe.
Yes.
And then there was the disputed territory, which, if you think about today, it's very accurate. It was the Muslim majority lands that are the subject of the whims of the other 3 and still disputed, right? So if you look at how Orwell divided the world, it's so curious to me today that when you look at these blocks emerging and you look at the current conflict, you can see a Eurasia, the Russian sphere of influence, emerging. You can see post-Brexit, Oceania emerging, which is the Anglo-Saxon world. And you can see China already there with East Asia. And you can see that they are all fighting over the resources in the Middle East. it's very curious to see how accurate Orwell's vision of the world was.
I wonder if it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like Jules Verne would draw the submarine in 1820 or whenever, well before they ever created them. And then, art becomes reality.
Submarines prior to that, actually. Very primitive ones. In fact, there were plans for submarines drawn up as early as like the late 1500s.
Oh, interesting.
Da
Vinci, for instance, would pen like helicopters. He would draw those before they were ever invented. I wonder if Orwell created a fantasy realm that is now being created.
He got the date wrong.
1984.
Sure, we're in 2022. However, I do think it was more than a coincidence.
Like
the man
he saw it coming.
Also, the man served in wars abroad. He kind of had quite a strong grip on world affairs.
But he was a man looking through a keyhole, trying to see the entirety of a ballroom.
Yeah.
And so if you look at Brave New World, I think we're seeing elements of that.
Absolutely.
Fahrenheit 451, prophetic.
Indeed.
And a V for Vendetta even. I mean, there's
great film.
Graphic novel.
And graphic novel.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So graphic novel is very, very different. I've not read it, but it was very different.
But where I was going with this, though, is that we are unaware of how we are perceived in Oceania. I'm going to use that phrase to refer to the Anglo-Saxon world today, just to continue with Orwell's point there. We're unaware how we're perceived. So when we condemn, and we should condemn, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, what we don't realize is that the vast majority of the rest of the world, the vast majority of humanity, are laughing at us because we're still in Iraq.
You brought up earlier how valuable it is to know what the world was like before the internet. If you know what the world was like before the invasion of Iraq, you know that it's not normal. And it's the bastardization of truth and justice and honesty and leadership.
And we've completely lost any moral high ground to talk about this. And that's part of the problem, that, the media is whipping up such a frenzy over this. And then I remember just 2 years ago, I went on a 5-day hunger strike because of the Uyghur genocide in China.
I remember that.
And the purpose was to get 100,000 signatures on a petition, because there's a parliamentary petition. If you get 100,000 signatures on that petition, you force a debate in Parliament. Now, we got that 100,000 within 5 days, and then it went to Parliament, and then they voted unanimously on the fact that there was a genocide in China, but it was only a symbolic vote, which is why it got through. It would not have got through if it wasn't a symbolic vote. So you got these talking heads, like the Mayor of London and others, like certain politicians, warhawks, who are talking about the need to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which would mean that we shoot down Russian jets, which is an act of war, right? So these idiots don't realize that you end up declaring war on Russia if you do that. Those same voices were not only quiet about the genocide in China, the Uyghur genocide, but resisted any effort to hold China accountable for it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we had the Olympics there, and we still sent our athletes over. And what were you mentioning earlier, Tim, with the Russians, that we were pulling their athletes, or can you refresh my memory?
Several organizations have banned Russian and Belarusian athletes from competing. Like Ironman did it, and there's a couple others, triathlons.
The spirit of the Olympics is that even if you're at war, you send your best athletes, you let them pass through your territory unhindered, and then they all compete, because it's the spirit of human competition is beyond warfare.
I just find it so out of touch. And then there are these calls. Look, again, I'm going to have to re-emphasize every time I say something on this topic, but again, Putin should not have gone into Ukraine. But he's not Hitler. And there are these people saying he's the new Hitler when you've got an active genocide going on in China. Right. And the worst part of this is, when you talk about Hitler and Nazism, in Ukraine in 2014, there was a change of regime that we in the West encouraged, the Maidan uprising that Putin would call a coup. Now, whatever word you want to use, there was regime change that we meaning our intelligence agencies, backed with full throttle, wholeheartedly. We backed that regime change because the government in Ukraine was pro-Russia. It pulled out of the affiliation with the EU, and we didn't like that. We wanted it to be pro-West. So we backed that regime change. And who did we bring to power? Nazis, actual Nazis.
You think Zelensky or
No, he's not a Nazi. He's Jewish. But you've got this thing called the Azov Brigade.
The battalion, right?
Azov Battalion. They are an armed Nazi battalion. Now, the word Nazi, the problem is it's been so overused today that nobody really believes the word Nazi or racist when it actually deserves to be used. But let's just be very clear. These guys they are swastika raising actual neo-Nazis. And I mean that in the literal sense of the word. And even the word literal is no longer literally.
That's true.
You got to bring the word figurative.
It's literally been changed. It means something else.
We talked about this with Lauren Southern as well.
It is unbelievable, right? Well, and they are formally incorporated into the Ukrainian National Guard. We funded them, by the way. When I say we funded them, actually sent them money. We trained them. We funded them. Canada, the US and the UK were involved in backing this battalion. And then they were incorporated into the Ukrainian National Guard. And then once Putin attacked, the Ukrainian National Guard, from their official and formal and verified Twitter account, posted a video bragging that this was an Azov fighter dipping bullets in pig's lard, saying that he was going to go and find the Muslims.
It's like that urban legend, that apocryphal story. Are you familiar?
No,
There's always there's an American general in the Middle East, killed a bunch of Islamic soldiers, and then but kept one alive, and put pig's blood on the corpses and said, "Go tell everyone what we did." But it's not. I believe that story is not true.
Yeah, I don't think. But this is this one is a video. That's been posted.
Right.
And the thing is,
I'm saying it's probably he probably saw that meme story on the internet, and
maybe. But the thing is, let's put aside the emotional reaction that some people may have to that video, right? And consider it strategically. The mistake historically that Chamberlain made was to appease Nazism in Europe in the belief that they could be of use to defeat the Soviet Union. So we know how that ended. What you've got at the moment is you've got a Nazi battalion as formally incorporated into the Ukrainian army in their military, and neo-Nazis from around the world are now traveling there to train with them. They are armed and they are part of the Ukrainian armed forces. My question is, if they win, or if Ukraine is split to east and west and they've got the river in the middle, if Putin takes from the upper river, if Putin takes eastern Ukraine and the Ukrainian regime that's there currently keeps the western part, the Nazis that are serving in their National Guard, in their army, who are pretty much the most powerful faction in terms of grassroots mobilization. I mean, guys, there are videos of children's summer camps in Ukraine making Nazi salutes. There's Nazi summer camps. They've had mass rallies. These are actual proper organized Nazis with swastikas, with insignia and everything. Now, imagine in whichever part they end up maintaining, they are now the government. So you've got an actual Nazi government that we funded and backed.
Sounds a lot like ISIS.
Yeah, sounds like an easy target.
And why? How did Al-Qaeda get created? The CIA were funding what they...
The Mujahideen.
That's right, to defeat the Soviets. Now, if it's not okay to...
They don't learn, do they?
No, it's the same thing over and over again.
It's intentional.
They did learn, and they
no,
used the same
Tim, here's the thing. They do study history. It's just that World War II is the only thing that ever happened in all of history. So anytime anything happens, we have to say, that guy is Hitler. And so like you said, pointing to Putin and going, that guy's Hitler. I mean, I don't know. He's a tyrannical leader over Russia, and now he's imposing himself on Ukrainians. Is there anyone in history who that just sounds like a little bit more like besides Hitler?
Yeah. I mean, he's an illiberal autocrat is the word to describe.
Illiberal?
Illiberal autocrat, right? He's a dictator he's not really keen on elections, but he's not Hitler. There's actual Nazis we're funding and backing.
This sounds like the overthrow of the Shah in Iran when we put the Ayatollah in power, and it was like a radical, well, from what I've learned, and maybe you can enlighten me, a radical Islamic regime in power because we wanted it to fight and destabilize the region. No. But then it ended up destabilizing the whole world.
Ian, more modern.
From my perspective.
More modern. It's Syria.
That was 79,
It's the same MO.
And some people say, look, your country's been invaded. Everyone should fight. We don't care if they're Nazis. And my point is, every country has racists and every country has Nazis and every country has jihadist extremists. But if you organize them into a formal battalion, that's the equivalent. So the analogy is false there with saying every country has racists. The equivalent analogy is the US Armed Forces having a formal KKK battalion with KKK flags as part of the army. That's the analogy, right? It's shocking. If the US did that, if the UK did that, people would be up in arms, but we're funding it in Ukraine.
And how come many of these woke YouTubers and personalities who have no problem, in fact, monetize attacking Nazis, are now very much in favor of our support of these groups in Ukraine?
But right. So listen, promoting a white man at work is deemed racist, but literally funding an actual Nazi armed battalion is fine.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend, so they say. I'm not a fan of that ideology.
Well, no, if they're going to say that, then I'm going to hold them to their word and say, so why is it wrong to fund ISIS in Syria and go and join them? We've got UK media calling for British citizen volunteers to go and join the Foreign Legion in Ukraine and join these people. So hang on a minute. So when young Muslim men went to join ISIS in Syria, that's terrorism, but you can go and join a Nazi brigade in Ukraine.
It's because public perception. They look, ISIS somehow managed to get, I think the famous image was like a Detroit plumbing company pickup truck in Syria or whatever. And everyone's like, how did they get this?
Yeah.
How were these weapons being given to many of these rebel groups ultimately then, becoming ISIS? And it's because I think it's fair to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, the U.S. wants to if the U.S. wants to destabilize a region, they provide material support to insurgent groups or extremist groups who then create problems.
Well, and so then that begs the question, what's going on in Ukraine, really? Like, why have we been funding armed Nazi battalions who have now been incorporated into the Ukrainian regime? What's going on?
I feel like it wouldn't be out of the question, and far be it from me, I'm not an expert. I think it's possible the country splits in half.
Yeah.
So I spent some time during Maidan. I went to Ukraine and I got to meet people and talk to them. Everybody down there was pro-EU. They said getting access to the Schengen zone, getting access to the European Union means a better economy. And Russia wants them to join the Trade Federation, which is similar, but much weaker and smaller. And it was a bad deal for Ukrainians. Not to mention, a lot of people I talked to said, honestly, we're scared of what Russia would do if they're given power over us because we saw what happened last time they had power over us. Holodomor. So many of these people, especially in Kiev, were very much like, rather be with Europe. Sorry. It seems like the U.S. has been using influence tactics, bribery, manipulation, like we saw with Joe Biden. If you don't fire the prosecutor, you don't get the $1 billion guaranteed loans, which is criminal, and he admitted to it. It was influence tactics, but the bribes, the cash, the money, it works. Putin didn't have that. Apparently, they didn't care enough. But like you mentioned, the regime change in 2014, the president Yanukovych was effectively ousted, fled the country, went to Russia. The new government comes in, very pro-West. So Russia loses because of that protest. And now it seems his only option, it seems to be a last resort physical invasion.
Well, why was that so important to him after he lost is really interesting. Most of Germany's gas comes through Ukraine. Yeah. And that's why he was building Nord Stream 2 to go through the Black Sea to bypass, because if you think about the Baltic Sea. Yeah. If you think about it, he had the access through Ukraine. He loses that. And so he tries to build Nord Stream 2 to go straight to Germany. That gets thwarted. Now he's got a problem.
By Trump.
Exactly. Right. Interesting. Right.
Right.
Now he's got a problem that he's lost the gas going through Ukraine because the regime's changed. He can't build it through the sea. But he's the second largest oil producer in the world. Now, if you want to understand, in terms of if Americans want to understand how that feels, when Ukraine was lost, as in Putin lost Ukraine, it went into the American sphere of influence. You end up with calls for it to join NATO, and from 1997, the expansion of NATO eastwards has incorporated most of those countries. But Ukraine is right on the border with Russia. So if you go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis and you remember what it felt like for Kennedy to have those missiles pointed at America from Cuba just 100 or so miles away, Putin's got to a point where he's saying, you're building bases on my border, you're asking for NATO membership, and this is my backyard. Why could Ukraine not have stayed neutral? That's the geopolitical conflict that's going on at the moment.
I think that's part of it, but Latvia and Estonia are NATO members, and they're on the border with Russia as well.
According to Scott Horton, who was just on Kennedy Nation, he was saying that it was Condoleezza Rice that got them into NATO and put long-range Tomahawk missile nuclear
but they didn't have the gas going through them. Exactly.
So one of the things I've been saying is there's the belief that a lot of people believe the conspiracy theory. Vladimir Putin is fighting Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum and the New World Order. You had that Ukrainian member of parliament who said that we're fighting for a New World Order. And so there are people who believe that there's this great global battle and Putin is defying it. And I'm like, Putin just wants to make sure he's getting the proper resources in exchange for the oil he produces so that he can fund his country.
I wonder, do you think he has some sort of issue with the World Economic Forum and a plan?
Well, he was on their website. He was a member. So I don't know if that holds up because he was a member himself, and they've just taken his profile off the website.
Oh wow! Switzerland,
they just removed him.
Switzerland's no longer neutral. They finally declared non-neutrality in a war for the first time I've ever seen, and that's what the Bank of International Settlements is, which is the central bank of central banks.
Yeah. Well, what I can say is that when you cancel Russia from SWIFT and Visa and MasterCard, what you are doing is precipitating the need for Russia to develop its own financial system. Now, when you kick Russia out of that, that could lead to a run on Russian banks. And if there's a run on Russian banks, if Germany as it is dependent on Russian gas, that will have a knock-on effect on Germany's economy. Mm-hmm. And you could end up with Weimar-style hyperinflation. That could lead to
in Russia,
but not just Russia, outside of Russia, because Germany relies on Russian gas. So energy prices spike. We're already seeing that, and that
$4 for gas out here.
Yeah. So the huge spike in energy prices has a knock-on effect to the point where stagflation really pretty much ends up destroying the currency. So it could end up being used regardless of whether it's planned or not. I tend not to go into intentions. I just look at reality and describe it and say, this is what's happening. So you could end up with a scenario where, because of stagflation, the dollar as a global reserve currency comes under intense pressure. And it's that moment that is used as an opportunity to switch over to central banking digital currencies.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., and we'll see you all there.